OctOSR, sometimes also referred to as OSR October or OSR Tober, is a month-long celebration of OSR styles of play. That is, play that grew out of the OSR movement. Old school rules, old school renaissance, old school revolution. Just as there's not really an agreement of what this month is called, there's also not an agreement of what the R is in OSR. There's also not full agreement among what OSR gaming means. Largely, it's split into two schools of thought, one being that it's play that is derived from using TSR era fantasy rules, D&D, OD&D, AD&D, BX or BECME, or second edition AD&D, though some OSR people do not consider second edition part of the movement. But the other major split within what OSR gaming means is simply how you play the game, the style with which you play the game, with certain principles that you apply to gaming that make it old school. For OctOSR, I'm focusing on this second aspect of OSR gaming, the principles with which the game is played, regardless of the rule set you use. That's as succinct an explanation as I can give you of what OSR is, so I hope you enjoy. In this episode, I'm going to focus on a frequently mentioned aspect of OSR gaming that you'll hear pretty much from anyone that plays in the OSR at some point, regardless of their view on what is OSR. And one of the first mentions of what is probably a foundational aspect of OSR gaming could be found in a document called A Quick Primer for Old School Gaming by Matt Finch. This document goes back to the earliest foundations of the OSR movement and is largely based around what is referred to in the document as 4 Zen moments. And the one I'm going to talk about today is rulings, not rules. Why rulings over rules? What separates RPGs from other types of games is what happens in, for lack of a better term, the play space. In video and computer games, this is the computer code. This is the coding of the game. Everything that the player can do and can't do and how they can and can't do it is coded into the game. You are not capable of doing things the game is not coded to not let you do. You are only able to take the actions that the code lets you do. If the code doesn't let you speak to people, other characters, other non-player characters within the game, then you cannot speak to people within the game. You just see them going by, they're doing their thing, or you interact with them in some other way. In board games and card games, the space is taken up by the rules. Can I do this? Well, let's look at the rules. Let's look at what the rules say. But in the play space of RPGs, particularly in the play space of older school RPGs, that space is occupied by the interaction between the game master and the players. The players stating what their actions are, the game master's telling them the results. The players asking questions about the world that they're experiencing, that their characters are experiencing and exploring, and the game masters giving them answers. That back and forth is what occupies the game space in RPGs. That is the departure that Dungeons and Dragons made from the war games that Gygax and Arneson were playing at the time that inspired this new style of play. Harkening back to the roots of an older style of wargaming, the Free Kriegspiel, where you had an impartial, neutral referee adjudicating the actions of two sides going against each other in a war game, and that referee responding on their knowledge of that environment, of that battlefield that this was playing out on, to give results, where the two sides would take actions based on their knowledge of the world around them, and the referee would decide how those actions interacted and, where necessary, include a randomizer, usually some sort of dice. In RPGs, the element of conflict between the players was eliminated because it wasn't a war game a war situation. Some people say it's still a war game, but it was not a war situation. And so the players were not playing against themselves. They were exploring and going against the challenges of a world, which sometimes might include armed conflict and sometimes would not. And again, the neutral GM, who is also running the game world, is deciding how the world reacts to the player's actions. And sometimes these actions are straightforward and exact. The GM knows exactly how the world reacts to the players. And other times, there's an element of chance, and you roll the dice. But clearing space for player actions is what separates RPGs from these other types of games. Clearing that play space. I found it interesting in a game called Neoclassical Geek Revival, the second edition basic book of which I was reading recently. They have something called the known rule. It's right at the front of the rule book. It says, NGR contains a large number of rules, and in the end, it is not likely someone will have them all memorized. The rules of this game are only applicable if someone involved actually knows the rule or claims to. If no party involved knows the rule, then they obviously did not choose their course of action based on the mechanics. In such a case, the GM should issue a ruling and move on. You should never look up rules during play. Now that's taking rulings over rules to an extreme, where it's not even a matter of not having a rule to cover the situation. It's just that no one GM or player knows it. But I think that in a lot of ways harkens back to the spirit of the beginnings of RPGs, where what's going on at the table usurps everything else, even maybe rules that exist. That's an extreme example. But I think it's a good example of rulings over rules and why it's there. The rules are not the game, which is different from any other game, other than maybe Calvin Ball, where the rules are both not the game and don't matter because they're constantly changing. And if you don't know what Calvin Ball is and where it comes from, look it up. I think you'll thank me. So that's all I have for this time. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts, please contact me. You'll find my contact information in the show notes, and I'll put them at the end here. If you have any feedback on this episode, you can contact me by email at phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com, on my Google Voice number, 864-209-1441, on my SpeakPipe link at www.speakpipe.com/phantomthoughts, or via Discord. My profile is The Pink Phantom. Or you can leave a comment on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@phantomthoughtspodcast.